Moral relativism. Anyone heard of that term before? The problem of evil. The cosmological argument. Some terms that by the end of this class, we should know what those terms are and be able to explain what they are and what they mean. So the class today is on apologetics, and we've titled it Loving God with All of Your Mind. And we really want to know how to defend our faith and what's it mean to defend our faith. And today's lesson is kind of an intro. It's an overview of the things that we're going to cover in a little more depth. But we're really going to be focused on knowing why you believe what you believe. And we're going to really talk about what apologetics accomplishes for us. So with that, let me ask, does anyone recognize this gentleman? Familiar to anyone? No? Well, this is Dr. Ronald Endicott. He's Arkansas State University professor of philosophy and was actually my professor when I went to ASU. He's up at NC State now. And he's not a believer, as you may have guessed. And about a couple weeks into class, he came in and put his books down and said, "Let's talk about God." And from there, proceeded to try to whittle away anything that any Christian had ever held dear. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being horrible, he was pretty fair. 6, 7, there's worse out there. I think, however, this is a common occurrence. And I want to read you what the writer of this book said about an occurrence that had, well, this is a hypothetical occurrence, but I think it's pretty common. He says, imagine that you are a college freshman in a philosophy class, already nervous and wanting to fit in and yet stay strong in your faith, and you hear your professor begin the class with a disturbing proclamation. When you leave my class at the end of this semester, you will be a skeptic. A skeptic about religion, the meaning of life, the existence of God. Why? Because as we shall soon see, it is impossible to know anything for certain, and all truth is subjective and personal. Before you can think about what you might possibly say, another student raises his hand. Excuse me, sir, but I know for certain that Jesus lives in my heart. And just where is that heart of yours that Jesus lives in, son? The professor replies. Can I see it? Can I weigh it? Can I test it by any scientific method? Oh, well, no, but I have faith that he's there. Ah, yes, the professor replies, faith. Sort of like believing you have money in your checking account, even though your statement and the teller tell you otherwise. Or like believing the earth is flat, or even though science says that it's spherical. You see, class, our poor friend has never dealt with the evidence, and has thus replaced reason with blind faith. Unfortunately, this is what usually leads to all the intolerance found in these loving Christians. Then he turns to the student and says, is there anything else you'd like to share with us today? The class interrupts with laughter, and the humiliated student says nothing. And now you're sitting at your desk, your head's spinning, and you're wondering, what am I going to do? Do I disagree? So you're left in this mix. So what the issue is with these two students, they don't know why they believe what they believe, and they don't have solid evidence. So that's what we're going to be dealing with. Before we get too much into solid evidence, let me tell you about roast. It looks like a good roast, right? Don't want to make anyone too hungry. This is known as the parable of the roast. And so the story here goes that a mother was cooking Thanksgiving dinner and preparing a roast. And the daughter comes in and was watching, as daughters typically do, and sees the mom cut the roast in half and put it in a pan and start to cook it. And she said, Mom, why did you cut the roast in half? And Mom said, well, honey, this is a family recipe. This was passed down from my mom. So this is the way we've always done it, but if you want to know, go ask my mom. And so the little girl go ask the grandmother, goes, Grandmother, why do we cut the roast in half when we're preparing it? And the grandmother says, well, honey, that's family recipe has been passed down from my mom. You can go ask great-grandma, and she may be able to tell you. So she goes and asks great-grandmother, and says, why do we cut the roast in half? The great-grandmother says, well, I've seen other people do it. I did it because a whole roast wouldn't fit in my oven. So I had to cut it in half and put it that way. So a parable should have a heavenly story. I don't know how heavenly that story was. But with an earthly meaning, or earthly story with a heavenly meaning, what meaning can we get from that? Well, it's important we know why we're doing what we're doing. The mother had no clue why she was cutting the roast in half. She was just doing it because that's how she always did it. So when we want to defend our faith, how easy is it? How easy is it for us to get in there and fight and say, yes, I believe this? It's probably pretty easy in a church. When we're surrounded by other believers, we don't feel too opened up, but it's probably a little bit more tough once we get out in the real world. It's probably a little bit more tricky. So has the Lord provided us anything to help deal with this? Let's look at what Ephesians 6:10 through 14 says. It says, finally, be strong in the Lord and in His mighty power. Notice what he says, put on the full armor of God so you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, he says it again, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything to stand firm then. And what's the very first armor that we talk about? Putting on the belt of truth buckled around your waist. So that's what this class is primarily going to be dealing with, is the belt of truth. And the picture there is we got all these other articles of armor, and we want to hold all those together. We want to hold our faith, hold the gospel, hold our salvation, hold the word together with truth. So how big do you want your truth to be? Right? Do you want your belt of truth to be like this? Right, that? Or you want a big old belt of truth, right? We want to be able to hold our truth together. So as much truth, true truth that we can bank on, we want to have. So I want you to kind of form a mental image of where you would be if you were to picture yourself with your armor, your spiritual armor. Maybe some of you have some leather vest on and a sword, and maybe that's it. You kind of got that mental image of where you would be with your different armaments. So I want to ask you, would you be more like this first picture? Is that your armor? That'd kind of be 0, right? Or more like the second picture. We want to strive to be like that. We want to be someone, and an atheist comes and says, well, he knows the truth. He is well armored against any fiery darts, right? So we want to be well armed in the battle. So, how do we get armed? We know what we believe, and we know why we believe. So let's define apologetics. Almost looks like an apology. Apology, I'm sorry. Well, that's not what it means here. It's not I'm sorry that I'm a Christian. It's not I'm sorry that I'm a Christian. But it's from the Greek word apologia, which means to give a reason or a defense. To give a reason or a defense. And formally, it's the branch of theology where we defend or prove that Christianity is true. So it's not I'm sorry that I'm a Christian, but it means to give a reason or a defense.